great to see you all. Before I kind of start my monologue, I'd just like to mention that stop me at any time, ask me any questions. This is primarily not only to just do a demo of how the functionality works, but I wanted to kind of go into some internals because, most of the people would be thinking like, how does Bito achieve this? What does it do internally? How does it actually work? And also some, tips and tricks on how to use it. Obviously, the product will get better as we kind of go ahead. And, some of you who've been using us since day one of this functionality launch, know that we had some issues and we have kept on improving on it. And, there are a few more things that are going to come out as we kind of build this. But at the same time, what I would need from you guys is, any kind of feedback wherein, hey, this is great, but, it didn't work in this situation. Can you help me here? Or, this thing is great, but, it works in this situation, doesn't work in this situation. So that, we get more critical feedback. We can use that to improve our product and also help you guys. So let me stop there. If you have any questions before I start, or, I can explain how, you know, AI that understands your code works at a very high level. And then we can go into a brief demo. And then I'll open it up for, any kind of questions, any feature requests, right? Any pain points that you guys have. It's more conversational, not just like, we telling you guys, this is what we have done, right? Because a product doesn't evolve just based on, what we think. It also evolves based on, how users are using it and where they want it to be used. So with that, you know, let me start with, how does AI that understands your code works. So typically, here I'm taking a very small example. You have your code repo. There's a typical folder structure. You have certain set of files in subdirectories. Like out here, you have my code repo, src. You have a Node.js, code index.js helper, package.json, Docker conf, and, README. I think I made a spelling mistake here. So this is your folder structure. And, when Bito says that, I understand your code and we index your code, what actually happens internally? So we go through each of the file in the folder that you've opened in your IDE. So for example, if I open a folder POC, for example, out here, all the files that are there and folders that are there in your directory that you have opened in your IDE, we go through all the files and we skip the binary files. Okay. We have recently added a functionality for git ignore and also Bito ignore if you don't want to modify your git ignore. So all the files that you have mentioned in git ignore or all the files that you have mentioned in Bito ignore or, the regular expressions, those will be excluded from indexing. Okay. Now, how does indexing actually work? So for every file in your folder, we actually take that file and, that there are limitations in large language models, like maybe GPT 3.5, GPT-4, even Claude, Anthropic, they all have token limits or the number of characters that you can basically give them at any given instance of time to understand and respond back, right? There's a limit. So GPT 3.5, now they have extended the limit to 16K tokens. GPT-4 is 32K tokens. Anthropic is 100K tokens, which is great because you can keep on increasing your context. But when I want to answer a question on your repository and I want to index it properly, I actually take a file and I divide it into chunks, right? So any file which is, say 100 lines or 1,000 lines or 5,000 lines, I'll break it down into smaller chunks. Okay. And each chunk, right, is indexed. So for each chunk or certain lines of the file, we go and generate a vector or embedding using either OpenAI embedding or, we are also testing out open source embedding models so that we don't basically, always call OpenAI, and that will go live in the next version. But we generate a numeric vector representation of those lines of code. And why that is required? Because these vectors allow us to do nearest neighborhood or like similarity match based on the question that you have given, right? So for every file, we divide it into multiple chunks. For each chunk, we actually generate a embedding vector, and we basically store it in an index file that we create on your machine, which actually stores the file name, the start and end of the chunk, and the embedding vector, right? And this is done for all the files in the folder that you've opened. Okay, so this is how indexing works, and that's why it takes certain amount of time to create this index. We've been improving on the speed. The first version used to take like 30 minutes for 10 MB. Now it takes 15, and we are planning to kind of reduce it again further by half, and also reduce the index size as we kind of get better at this. Now this is how the indexing works. So how does the query work? Right now, most of you might have used GPT 3.5 or ChatGPT and Anthropic Chat or some form of LLM. But these LLMs are very good at answering generic questions, right? Based on the model or data that they are trained, because they're trained with all the data till a certain amount of time, right? Based on internet, the code that is there on GitHub, and so on. But the other thing that language models can do is answer based on restricted set of data. But how do you provide it data, and how do you restrict basically a large language model like ChatGPT or GPT 3.5, Anthropic or GPT-4 to do that? So what you can try, if you have access to those, is you can actually provide some context, or take a particular file, take some content from it and provide it and say that this is my context, right? And here's the context. Then you can say, using the context above and nothing else, answer this question. So what you're trying to do is limit the large language model by saying that this is the data that I'm providing you, only answer the question based on this data. Now, although I'm basically mentioning this, your prompt or the question that you ask needs a lot of amount of rules and regulations so that it doesn't go beyond that context. But in simple terms, that is how you ask LLM to answer questions on some known data, right? And that is why the index is very important, because what we do is based on the query that you are asking, right? We look for some keywords that are mentioned in the help. I'll go over that, like my code, my repo, my project, right? There are 4 keywords that we support. So if you say, explain this particular file in my code, what we do is, based on the question that you've asked, we check, if there are these keywords in it. And if so, we generate an embedding or a numeric vector representation of the string or the query that you have basically given. Using that and the index, we figure out which chunks within the index, right, are in the nearest neighborhood of the query that you're asking. That means, which are the contents which can help answer or have information related to the query that you're asking. Now, using those chunks, we actually have in the chunk the file name, the start and end, location of that chunk. So we read the data directly from your file system or that particular file and create a context. Now that context is provided to the LLM that is used, right? Like for example, if you're using basic model, it is GPT 3.5 or Claude 1.3. If you're using advanced model, it will be GPT-4, Claude 2 models that will basically be used to answer that question. And again, this basic and advanced actually control the amount of context that you can provide, right? Based on the limitations of the model. If it is basic, at max, you can go 16K tokens. If it is advanced, at max, you can go 100K tokens. So, obviously, if you are going through a larger project, advanced is much more better. Now, once we get these chunks might be incomplete, right? You might be at the start of the function. You might be at the end of the function because, the string that you're searching for matches those locations. Now we figure out that, okay, the starting chunk is there or in between chunk is figured out, but I need the whole function. So we expand the context. That's some internal logic that we utilize to do that. Now, once that context is created, we provide that context to the LLM, which is, maybe OpenAI or Anthropic, and say that this is the context. Using the context, now try to answer this particular query from the user. And that is how you get answers to, questions based on, your own data, your own code. So that is how it works. And, at a very high level, this is how, AI that understands your code works, right? All of the data, by the way, is stored on your machine, right? We do actually make requests to large language models because we have to create this embedding vectors, right? And to protect privacy, we have made sure that all the LLM accounts that we use, it may be Anthropic, Azure, OpenAI, or OpenAI, we have signed agreements with them that any data that we pass is not used for training, is not recorded, not logged. That's number one. Any data that we utilize for creating index is not stored on our side. We act as pass through. The index that is created is stored on your machine. Under your user folder, you'll find a .bito folder. Under that, you'll find local code search folder. Within that, all the index files are maintained. So all the indexes are on your machine. Even your session history, your question and answers are on your machine. We don't store or use anything on the server side. The logic that we have is to basically make sure on the client side, we create better context. And on the server side, we have a lot of amount of prompt engineering to try to make sure that you get answers to the questions that you're asking without LLM basically introducing as much as possible hallucination, right? Or creating things that are not there. Although we say, we try to reduce it as much as possible. The reason for that being is it's not 100% there. And hallucination is also a necessary evil. The reason for that being is if you remove hallucination, it will only answer what it has seen. It won't construct something beyond that. So, it's kind of a necessary evil, but, we try to curb it as much as possible when it is answering question on your local code. But you might see certain things. And when you see something like that, let us know so that we can, change our prompts and so on. Any questions on the high level details? Any inputs, any suggestions? Yeah.
Yeah, I got a question. So, I actually am making a chatbot for a contract right now, and I was actually experimenting with this with pretty much breaking down pages into docs and exactly what you're doing with embeddings and vector database and using LangChain. And so, um, at least for what I'm using it for in Q&A, I noticed that the it's not really good at precise information. It's really not good at like returning like exact numbers for specifications and things like that. It kind of like flubs them up a little bit because it's like it'll give you something similar, but it'll mess it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And so, are you finding this problem with code? Because I haven't experimented with code. This is mostly for like specifications and docs and stuff.
So in code, it can happen in some cases. For example, you're searching for a particular function, and as I said, it answers based on the context, right? So sometimes what happens is the context that you're providing is incomplete, right? And it can happen in code files also. So say that, my context length is limited to say 100K in Anthropic, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you are basically using a function in multiple files. Now you ask a question like, hey, can you tell me where this function is, utilized and what kind of optimization I should do based on, how people are utilizing this function, right? Something like
Yeah.
that. Now
Yeah.
it needs to actually get the whole view, but we cannot get the whole view because in the 100K context, only certain files and certain calls will come in, right? But then
Yeah.
if there is like a readme or something somewhere, right, which says it is also utilized here, now when it doesn't have that information, it will sometimes try to create on its own, right?
Yeah.
That is where you see that. And for that, if you're basically writing a prompt, you have to give a set of rules. Like, what we have figured out is may it be Anthropic, may it be GPT-4, right? 3.5 is like a bit weird and, you have to
Yeah.
kind of prompt it differently. But GPT-4 and Anthropic, if you give rule-based prompts, right? Hey, these are the set of rules. Following these rules only do this.
Yeah, I actually
Then,
tried
yeah,
that.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
doing the exact same thing,
Yes, yes.
except for I have not been getting consistent results. What I ended
Yeah.
up doing was fine tuning a 34 billion parameter code llama model, which just
Mm,
got released recently. I'm sure you're
yeah,
familiar. And
Yeah.
so I just recently fine-tuned a model to be context obedient, where it only answers based on the context. Is there a reason why you're using OpenAI instead of like a model that is fine-tuned for that specific task?
I would say yes for now because fine tuning actually requires, a lot more data. If you know your bounds, then it is much more easier. But
Yeah.
when you are basically providing a generic solution across for all the people, fine tuning may solve for some users, but might create problems for some other users. So we are kind of thinking of, we have tried fine tuning, but mostly with open source models because
Yeah.
all said and done, you don't want to basically fine tune using open AI, right? Like with
Yeah.
somebody else's data. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. This is really, really interesting. I'm really glad I came to this meeting. What was that other question? Oh, so what I did to come up with like to make sure that the context is relevant is
Hmm,
I actually ran it through a smaller model and
hmm,
pretty much ranked the context and chose the best context and then send that to the LLM to handle it. So it's
hmm.
kind of like an intermediary model between the other model.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's been working really well for my demo. I just had a demo yesterday. Well, it's so loud. Uh, that's not me. That's someone else. But
Sophia, can you
But
move?
yeah, the Code Llama model, the 34 billion, you guys should really look into it because it actually just got a higher score than GPT-4 in Python. So that's
Yeah,
something to think about.
yeah. So we are testing out Llama 2 model right now. There are some languages that it is good at, and there are some languages like Rust and so on, wherein we figured out that sometimes it basically has its own quirks. So before we put it in, we are kind of like testing a bit more because then what our idea is like, okay, it may not support all the languages, but can we do something like the languages that it is good at, we can use Llama 2. For others, till it basically becomes better, or you kind of train it, kind of crub it, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, it's kind of very interesting, and it's basically evolving pretty much, on a, I'd say, weekly basis, right?
for
To be very
sure,
frank.
for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah,
I'm really excited about your product. It sounds really cool, and
yeah.
I'm curious of a lot of things in your product. So I'm just
Sure.
gonna let you talk. I'm just gonna listen.
No, no, fine. Do ask questions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm just curious because you mentioned the contact link thing,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there's a lot of new stuff coming out with like there's 16K contact length open source models,
yeah.
32K contact length, and
Mm,
it's really interesting. And so I like that there's a lot of variability in how you mentioned you didn't
yeah.
want to be stuck with OpenAI when you mentioned
OpenAI,
earlier.
yeah.
So it's really
And then
cool.
yeah. And then the other thing is the embedding is also interesting. So when you create the index, the thing is most of these models, even open source models, are very good. They'll basically, when you create an index, you need to use embedding vectors. The bigger embedding vectors they are, right, the more precise search you can do. But at the same time, what happens is your index size increases, right? And because we are trying to make sure that, like user is comfortable, you're not storing any data on the server side. Because, if you're storing data on the server side, things become easy, right? Like, you can create index once, 10 people can use it. But then, what happens if somebody attacks your data center, right? Somebody else's data is gonna, go
Yeah,
out there. So we want to make sure that it's on the user's machine. So we have to take care of the index size, right? So right now, from the model that we're using for embedding, we are moving to another model which actually has a smaller vector size so that the index size can be reduced. At the same time, you have to make sure that when you're using any open source or other embedding models, it basically is not like silently ignoring certain things, right?
yeah,
So when you're sending data for indexing, you believe that, based on all these lines or the data that you've given, embedding is created. But sometimes you figure out that these models actually take, infinite amount of data, and they'll respond back with vector. Then you figure out that, oh, it just took like first 512 tokens of the data that you have given. So it created the index only on the top portion, the remaining it ignored, but it never told you that it's ignoring it. So when you see the results after that, it's funny because like, how did this data get here? Or it's answering totally something different because your context wasn't created. So we have to kind of make sure that the vector that is created embedding actually utilizes all of the data, because I'm
yeah,
like, I'm depending upon it for search, right? And there are other things also. So for example, this AI that understands your code can answer questions related to your code, but it's
yeah,
not a replacement for symbol search. Like, if
yeah,
I'm basically figuring out, something like, where does like, tell me all the files which has console.log. A grep is much more faster, or a
Yeah.
symbol search is much more faster because you're doing string comparison.
Yeah.
LLM or AI models are
Semantic.
not good at string comparison because I'll have to
Not at
go
all.
through all the files,
Yeah, and
right?
it's not exact. It's not going to be exact words, exact thing. But yeah, I get it. That's super
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So that's
Yeah.
so we've got some feedback around that. And one of the good news I'll tell people is like we are now also working on, like, it's gonna take some time because code search is not that easy. But that said, one is the AI model to answer the questions, but if somebody wants to do symbol search, it is gonna come in Bito at some point in time. We've already started working on, you know, creating search indexes as you basically create indexes for your normal code repositories, like the old way of doing things.
Mhm.
But then you can utilize that along with AI to get better of both the worlds, rather than,
Yeah.
okay, it can answer me these questions, but then I have to do a control F, and then I have to figure things out. So
Yeah.
that's not there in the current version. We've started working on it. It's gonna take some time because before we release it, we need to be sure that we ourselves can use it, right?
Yeah.
So
Um, so do you cite your sources for the parts of the code that it found? Because like a good example is like private GPT is an open source or open source thing to use for, just Q&A and things like that. And so it does cite its sources and prints out the context of where it got its sources from that you can look at as well. Is that something you guys have as planned or something you do?
So that is something that we have as planned. But mostly when you're using your own code, we'll be able to get that. Getting that is much more easier. When you're generating code, it depends upon whether the model that you're using actually has referencing capabilities, right? So sometimes, and you can check that, like if you're basically asking a question, you can say also provide references, and then what you have to do is you have to verify those references because the references can also be hallucinated by the LLM,
Yeah, I
right?
found this
Sometimes,
problem a lot. It's
yeah,
really
yeah,
fun. It's a fun problem.
yeah. So what do you do in that scenario? Like, like when we started kind of looking at references, why didn't we release it right now? Is because sometimes when you ask for references, even though you have given the context, it might give you a URL. Then you have to actually go through the answer, look at all the URLs or citations it has given, and actually do a web search to figure out whether those are correct, right?
Yeah, I
Otherwise,
have exactly. Yeah, I
yeah,
actually have web links for contact us and things like that in my Q&A bot, and
yeah,
it took a while to get it to give you a correct website. That's not just like, oh, slash contact us and just putting it at a random website and then slash contact us.
yeah. That
Yeah,
that
so
happens a lot, and you have to verify it. So what
yeah,
we call it internally is you have a you know AI which basically generates generative AI.
yeah,
But once it generates something, at some point in time, you need existential AI, which basically only answers or only provides data that is existing, and try to actually verify what this guy has generated, right? Or the references it is given is actually existing. Now, again, the
super cool.
fun part is, in when you're basically doing analysis and research, this all works because you are focused on that problem. So you're okay when you get that answer within 15 minutes.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
when a
as long as
user
it's
is
accurate.
yeah. But when a user is trying to use it, it's like, what the heck? I cannot wait for 15 minutes. I just asked you to generate one line of code,
Yeah,
right?
but I mean,
Give
if
it to
it's just
me.
like people, you ask someone else to do it, if it's a
Yeah,
person, it'll take them 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes a day.
yeah, yeah,
So don't be so impatient.
yeah, yeah.
Get it right.
So we have to kind of do that. The other restriction, that, I'd like to mention out here is, we are restricted by the amount of context that we can use at a time because, we don't want people to kind of like give a question. Although, I think today also, there is some wait time and people are dealing with it, and we would like to reduce that as much as further. But what we try to do is try to get you an answer very quickly. That means even though I might have like lot of context to answer the question, I'll only utilize enough that fits into, say
The
100K
query.
context
Yeah.
immediately to give you an answer, right? So it may not basically contain all the references, all the code that I can answer your question on. So, here's where we'll need some feedback from everyone. Like, would you be okay if I give an answer, right, based on the data that I've seen till now? and there is, still more data that I can answer your question on. So once
Oh,
I
like
finish
build
the,
up to
yeah,
a
build up
correct
to,
answer.
yeah.
I like that. That's cool. I was thinking multi-model and having multiple models to like adversarially check each other.
Hmm. So, our thing is, say, for example, you say where all this function is used, and there are say 1,000 files where this function is used. I'm not looking at like code search, for example, but in what, like I'm trying to get an explanation like where it is used and why it is used, kind of thing, right? Which AI can do. Now, in a context of 100K, say that the first 500 files fit in, but there are 500 files remaining that I have to go through. So will it be okay if I give the answer that I have right now and then have something like a continue button saying that, hey, I've
Yeah.
only gone through certain amount of files. There's still more files. Do you want to continue with this answer? Right? Because I have to get back to the user quickly. So that's something that, we are looking for some feedback. So, if you have any feedback, Andrew, if you have any feedback, anybody else, that would be good to know.
I was just thinking you could have if somebody, because you were saying you have like kind of generic sort of models,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to have it generic to a certain point, um, and it could cause problems if you kind of like narrow things down to a certain point. I was thinking you could maybe make that like an option or setting, like you could you know, like you could have like a generic sort of context modeling, but then if you need something like very like specific, you could like have like model packs or something like that, that you could stick in there or something like that. I don't know. Just an idea.
Okay. I'm taking a note of that, Andrew. Okay. And anybody else, any feedback? I don't want to continue with the monologue, but get more feedback. So, okay. How about some demo? So this is how our UI looks like for people who have used it. And people who haven't used it, this is how our UI looks like. We have like, in the UI, basic and advanced model, right? This is basically for making sure that you know where you're spending your money on. So basic model is limited to, I'd say 12K to 16K context. Why I say 12K to 16K? Because these models actually take an input and you also generate output. So, it has to fit into that. Um, and, I just mentioned that, we index the code so you can go and check all your repos that are indexed in this, manage your repos, I'd say screen or tab. As you can see out here, I have like a few repositories indexed. One I have kind of paused, and currently I'm in POC repo, that I always used to give demo. So if you've seen my videos, um, so let me ask it a question, and I'll do few things so that typical mistakes that people make, right? So the first mistake that people make, I'll go with all the mistakes, and then I'll correct them. So here, what does code in index.js do? The first time anybody indexes, they basically will ask this particular question, and then they'll get a generic answer like this, right? Like, okay, index.js typically serves an entry point, blah blah blah. Now you're like, but I just indexed my code, what the hell? It's giving me a generic answer. And one of the things, it's very difficult for everybody to remember, but we're also trying to figure out a way to actually make this like easy. Right now we use a few keywords to know that you're trying to actually look at your local index, because the same interface can give you generic answers. Sometimes you're trying to get answers to generic questions like how do I do X, how do I do Y, wherein I need to use generic model data. But sometimes you're asking questions on your own code. So these are the keywords that you need to use every time, unfortunately, right now. And we'll be basically working on improving this. And if you have any ideas of how to kind of deal with this, do let us know. Uh, but, main thing is, most of the times people forget this. So it's the same question. If I basically give it as what does code in index.js in my code do, this will actually go to your local code, right? And we
What's
have
the
put
in
a
my
code.
workspace one?
Huh?
What's the in my workspace?
So yeah, so you can use my code or in my workspace or my repo or my project. So any one of these will actually tell us that you want to search in your local code index.
Okay, so they're all the same.
Yeah, all
thing.
the same. They're kind of
Oh, okay.
keywords, right? Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if there was some sort of difference, like some sort of scope that it's looking at. Like, like repo would be a bigger scope than like my project or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, that is interesting. We never thought about that. Now let me take that as a input, because sometimes my code may mean like the code that I've opened, right? Kind of that scope. My repo, my project, my workspace. That's interesting. Right now they all do the same thing. It means like look at your local code. But thanks, Andrew, for that. Let me actually take that as an input. Okay. So here it gave you an answer. Again, like this is like, I don't know which file this is giving the answer for, right? Because I might have multiple index.js. So, when you're basically asking the question, it is good to basically say, give some information, right? Like, what does code in Bito AI slash index.js in my code or in my repo do, right? So most of the times, like index.js, people just ask it and like, it's not giving me the answer because, even the model doesn't know if there are multiple index.js files, which one do I refer to, right? So now it's giving me a good answer, right? Like if I kind of look at it, it has explain diff, right? Explain code, explain concept, and so on. So now out here, if you see, it just stopped, with these two, right? And if I basically take the same question and move to a new session with advanced and ask the same question, the answer will be a bit different because now the context window is a bit large. And the fun part is we do maintain the context, right, of the previous questions that is there, right? So now it gave you this, right? So it added one more interface that is there out here, which wasn't there in the other one because the context is much more better right now. One of the things that people do is sometimes when they forget my code and they still get answers, they're like, they forget to put my code. So now, because I've asked this question, right, I can just say, what does index dot do? I've not put my code or anything. Right. And I'm like, okay, I get generic answer. Let me ask, like, what does explain code do? Now, what happens is out here, it basically also uses the context that was there before. All right. So now you get an answer even without giving my code, where it's basically giving an answer based on the previous context. Right. So if you change your code, it might still give you the answer based on the previous context in the chat history. So that's why sometimes people are like, it is answering me without my code, and sometimes I need to put my code. Why is there, this difference? The difference is because you had already asked the question, so it has the prior knowledge, so it is answering based on that knowledge. Sometimes when you're asking question, it is not there in the prior knowledge, but it is required from your own code context. Always give my code as an input. We are working on like changing this and somehow recognizing the fact that you started asking questions on my code. so that we remember that and always, include your code context in answering the question. But we're in kind of two minds, because when you then ask a generic question, how do we kind of switch back? So if you have any ideas or any thoughts, will be good to know from your experience, like what do you think would be the right way to deal with this? Or rather than saying what would be the solution, what is it that you'd like to see actually happen?
And so when you click the delete button on the top left, that totally clears out all that recent context that it understands, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, complete. Yeah. But make sure that sometimes people do this and they're like, I asked 10 questions, it deleted everything. So it deletes everything, not the last part only. So yeah.
I've been using that little delete button
Yeah.
on the top left to like kind of every once in a while clear it out, thinking maybe it's storing a whole bunch of stuff in the RAM and taking up like resources and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Is that like true, or like is it good to clear that out if you have kind of limited resources on your
Yeah.
machine?
So what we do is, typically you have multiple sessions, right? Which you can see in history. So
Okay.
only the current session, which is active, which is shown, mostly at the top, is stored in memory, right? And if the number of questions increase, then we typically will store the last 20 questions and remove the others from memory.
Okay. So if I've been using it for like 5 hours straight,
Hmm.
and it's not going to be like my RAM's not going to be like going crazy or anything.
No, it won't go crazy.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
I have, I just wanted to mention, I have noticed just like two things. I really love your product, by the way, too.
Hmm.
It's a really neat little piece of software in my IDE. I really like it a lot. Even just for asking questions, like normally I'd ask Google or something like that. Like I'm looking for syntax on something or just some generic question about tech question, right? And I can just be like, hey, Bito, what's like the syntax for this thing or whatever, right? And it's just like, oh yeah, here's a code example, and do you want me to put it in your code for you? So it's kind of cool. But the two things I did notice is sometimes when I'm doing like I highlight a function and I click the performance thing and it analyzes the code and it does all that really well so far. And then it brings in the comparison thing, which is really cool, by the way. It's like kind of like Git merge, right? And you
Yeah.
can like the diff, right? Comparison. So that's really cool. But the weird thing is sometimes it doesn't always do this, but sometimes it doesn't actually take that code and put it in the suggestion in that main area. I have to actually highlight the code example on the right in like the chat, copy it, and then paste it in the left side of the comparison thing. That's the suggested code.
Mhm.
And then once I paste it in, then it like I see the comparison. I can click this over here or this over here, and equalize them out just like I would like on a Git merge, right? So that all works really well. But I just noticed sometimes that suggested code doesn't actually end up in that suggestion thing on there, and I have to copy and paste it over. So I just thought I'd mention that to you.
No, I
And
like it.
also, the Bito panel itself seems to
Mhm.
freeze sometimes when I'm working. So, like, I've got 16 gigs of RAM on my work machine right now. I do need more RAM, but and I usually have a couple like servers, like a front end and back end server running while I'm working, right, locally. But my resources aren't that bad, but sometimes the Bito panel will freeze in the IDE. I'm using JetBrains WebStorm mainly right now because the project I'm on is JavaScript. So it'll freeze, and when I mouse over it, it's just like the hand symbol, like this. And it's like you can't do anything. You can't click anything in the Bito panel. You can't even close it. It's just like completely frozen. I have to like close my IDE and reopen it, and then everything's fine, right? So that's actually the reason I started using that delete button to clear out the chat every once in a while. I was thinking maybe they're related somehow, so I wasn't sure. So yeah, I thought I'd mention that. And sometimes, like not very often, but sometimes the whole IDE will freeze when I do like I click the performance thing. Usually it's on like a really large function, right, or method. When I highlight something really big piece of code, usually it's okay, but sometimes I click that and like the odd time the IDE will freeze and I have to like close the IDE completely and reopen it. So, but other than those two issues, like yeah, you have a really cool piece of software. I really like it. I'm really excited about it too, and to see what you guys do with it. Yeah.
Cool. So Andrew, I've taken the notes. So one is like the freeze issue. The other one is uh, basically in the diff view, right? The changes that are suggested don't kind of show up once in a while, right?
Yeah. Like they show up on the right. You know how they have the little code, square in the chat, and it shows like the code, and you can highlight it and stuff. That's really cool. But it just doesn't show up sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes it doesn't show up on the left.
Okay.
And it's actually been happening more recently for some reason, which is weird.
Okay.
But
That's good to know. We might have added regression. Sorry about that. But I'll take a note and we'll fix it in the upcoming release. Yeah. And then this is all with WebStorm. I mean, basically JetBrains IDs. Cool. Any other feedback? Any other questions? Any other feature requests? Any things we should do better with?
Can I ask a general question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, my name is Mohammed Farouk, and I'm a transfer student to CSUSB. This is the first semester. I know a little bit about the AI technology, and I like your product so far as you describe it. And congrats for your product. My question is as I'm excited to know more about the AI. So we learn or follow specific courses at the CSUs and all other campuses. Uh, what kind of other programs do you recommend? Additionally, we can take to learn more about the AI.
Okay. Basically, there are two, on the courses, we'll have to get back to you. But I'd say on practical training, you can actually, open a OpenAI or even Anthropic has started basically providing access and try out real code. But if you want to basically understand how it works, then look at the transformer model. There's a lot of open source code on Hugging Face also for practical stuff. On the courses piece, we'll have to get back to you on that because there are there's a lot of amount of NLP involved in this. So some people are going from NLP out there, and then this transform model is another aspect that people are kind of looking at, and then there is optimization in between. So on the courses, I'll have to get back because I'll have to check which ones actually have those in their courses. But on the practical aspect, I'd say just try out the APIs and look at a transformer model. And if you want some help on setting it up and instructions, we'll as the AI guys or community members, will surely help you set up or help you with hey, if you're getting this issue, do these things, and then your thing will run, and this is how it works, kind of thing.
Okay, great.
So do reach out to us, and because this is we are learning, we are improving, we are building, but at the same point in time, as you kind of get to know certain things, or if you don't know, we are willing to help because
Yeah, sure, I will, because this is also part of my assignment. I will learn about this meetup.com and the meetings here through my course. So that's why I ask you, especially about the AI. I'm so excited to learn more about this. But in the college or at the school like CSUs, there or other campuses, we are following just a certain and specific subjects. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So Mohammed, what I'll do is, you can basically, after this, share your email address, and what we'll do is I'll send you, a list of things that you can do, list of examples that you can try out. Like once you try that out, then you can basically create a, I'd say a small project in your mind. Let me do this now using this. Then then it becomes easy. So I'll give you some stepping stones so that you can get started.
Okay, that's great. I will share my email in the chat directly with you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, so this is one of the requests from my, co-founder, our product guy, because of which, our UI and everything looks solid. I'm the backend guy, so I just, write APIs. So, one of the questions he had is like, what would you want us to do? Like, this is an IDE extension we're kind of thinking about. We have a CLI, which can be used for automation also, or, for people who are not using Visual Studio Code or JetBrains and directly using Vim, we do have a CLI so that they don't get left out. And we are thinking of like, there are certain things that you want to do on a day-to-day basis. One of the things is like, can I write test scripts? Can I review PR requests? Can I, like, as Andrew mentioned, like, I like the performance, check. If you wanted to kind of do that without you calling it, but on all the code that you check in, is that some functionality that you're kind of looking at? Is automation something that you're looking at? Just to get kind of feedback from you guys.
It'd be cool if you could ask it, like, well, maybe you can now, but it'd be cool if you could ask it like, hey, just like, do you have any general like performance, like not on this like individual function or even this file, but like just like the whole repo, just like, can you analyze my whole program and point out, like, I know if it pointed out every single thing, it would be like chapter 20, but like, you know what I mean? Like just like more generalized, like, this section has a bunch of stuff that could, be, this and this and this and this. And we found like a bunch of style mistakes in here that's not consistent, and just kind of like a once over on like the whole repo. And it could like kind of, that might be helpful for like cluing in on, performance issues or bugs or something like that in software. It might actually help you like kind of notice something you might not have noticed before. And like the program kind of says, hey, you know what, in this module, this is kind of wonky. And you're like, oh yeah, you're right. And you kind of like start looking at that module a little bit and perform, so just, kind of an idea if you could like, I don't know if it could handle that, because I'd be like, depending on the size of the program, if it's a huge program, I guess it would be difficult for it to handle all that maybe, but I don't know.
I mean, it's not in one shot, but we can do multi-shot thing. Like, that is what we're kind of thinking of. Can we basically, go through, like, it is as good as like, looking at individual things, taking them together, and then also looking at, like, once you have like the summaries of all, summarizing across all to kind of look at, what are the major pain points, or, if this function is defined at two different places, guys, we need to kind of create a module, right, for that, and then use it in two different places.
Or even like flow of the program. Like you could say like, like the way your program is going is like this, but it would actually be way better if you did it like slightly differently like this, and like just like kind of the general like flow of the program, how it's, kind of operating. That would be helpful.
Yeah.
I like that idea too, like a graph of what's being made of your code, right? Like the flow of how your code works and suggestions. That's really cool. That's a great idea, Andrew.
Yeah. I'll take a note of
I
that.
agree. I got a few questions as well. Wanted to ask about you asked about the feature request, and I was thinking I've seen in one similar tool, I tested it on JetBrains IDE, that when you have some error, for example, you cast a string to the integer and you can't cast it because of the type. You have to change it from int to string. Just a basic example. So you get those red lines under the line of the code, and when you click Alt Enter, for example, or Option Enter, like to fix the code in VS Code or JetBrains, that similar tool had like built-in stuff like fix it with the name of the tool. Maybe you could integrate with the VS Code. I'm using JetBrains and also JetBrains, and like react on the, because what's happening, like if you have some, for example, like a developer that has some error and it's not really familiar to him, he has to select it with the mouse, copy paste it to Bito, and add like how to fix it and something, and press search. So like you could minimize it, because like just not only search refactoring the code, searching for the performance issues and all the stuff that you have built in already, like the templates you have built in, but also to search for the errors that comes up. Might be cool.
Okay, no, that's good,
Andrew. Yeah, right. And also you asked about this. I'm kind of wondering about what does the code in index.js and my code do, and I was thinking like how would I tackle this this issue, and I'm thinking like it's not really easy to make it completely automatically. You would probably I would just put a prompt for the user. Like if you just search for the contains code or my code or repo, my repo, if the query contains it, maybe ask like kind of a prompt window for the user. Do you mean like, would you like to search in your particular code, or do you ask in general? And he has two buttons, my code, and I'm just asking in general, like just two buttons. Maybe, but it won't be that easy. I'm thinking there are some edge cases that you need to handle, and yeah, but you will probably have to ask user for this kind of things.
Yeah. No, this is good. I think the error piece is like really cool, because if you basically can identify those and immediately basically kind of show something wherein you can go and say fix it, right, rather than you having to copy paste. That's great. And even
True.
the idea about how to kind of switch, are you looking at your code or like generic answers? Yeah.
True. And I was also got a question about the limit, like the queries, max queries limited for the ChatGPT GPT-4 model, because you have like 100 queries per month. Is it correct?
Yeah. Per user in that workspace. Yeah.
Per user and per month, right? So
yeah.
100 per month, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, because I was like, I'm using Bito because I like that it's integrated in the JetBrains IDE. It's just more comfortable for me and faster. My friend, I was trying to show this tool to him, and he was like, okay, I need a pro version. And he compared ChatGPT 4, and it's like 50 queries per 3 hours limit. So it's much more queries per month. And I was thinking, what actually hits this kind of limit for you? Because it would be nice to have 100 per month is quite not enough. Because, for example, I'm doing the refactoring of the whole project, and we're writing all the unit tests in the I'm doing Flutter in Dart before I was doing Android and iOS. And yeah, this like what actually hits? Why it's 100 per month? And it will be cool. Me too. Thanks. And would it be possible to make it more than 100 in the future?
So right now we've kind of based it on like total requests that we see, and then obviously we've been giving like free and paid versions. So this is I wouldn't say we are basically doing it just to make money, but it's somewhat cover our AI costs. But let me take that as a feedback and get back to you. But this is based on like like to be I'll be very frank, right? All the AI guys right now, if you kind of look at the costing that they're giving, everybody is kind of losing money, but they have like billions in funding.
Yeah.
Except for us, we don't have billions in funding. But that said,
Andre, hi. My name's Amar. I'm co-founder with Anand. I can maybe add a little bit too. Yeah. So, GPT 3.5, like in our free version, is a much cheaper model than GPT-4 or Anthropic 2, Claude 2. So we actually tried to price it. We're trying to give as much as we can, but I think so that's why we also built in that you can get additional queries for, and pay more. So for example, you can get 200 another 100 queries for another, $10. So we are hoping that as the cost of these models comes down, we are hoping to bring those costs down, over time for sure. So I would hope that sitting here in a year, that same plan would have 200 or 300 queries, not 100, but it's somewhat limited, dependent on the cost of the models, because we're using sophisticated models. And the other thing I'll just mention is that a huge driver of it is the length of the queries, like how much context is in there, and then like if you give it a whole file versus if you ask let's say you ask a question that says, how do I convert a string into a short string or something in Java, that costs us very little. There's very few tokens in that. But if you give an entire file and say, hey, can you document this or build me test cases or whatever, the cost for that is probably 100 times what the cost. So we tried to make it simple. We thought about a model where we'd say, oh, let's charge by the number of tokens or characters. But then we thought for users, for you, it's like very difficult to understand, what's happening. So we did it more on a, kind of request basis. So we just launched our paid plans about a month ago. So we're trying to collect the feedback. So this feedback's super helpful, and trying to see what people are saying, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I totally hear you. We just haven't figured out a way to make it cost effective. We're not like making tons of money on that $15 plan, if you will, so.
Sure. Gotcha. Understand. Okay. This one is clear. I was curious, how does actually this, the project indexing, like the whole code base indexing works? Like, do you basically put, like if I'm asking about some question about my code base, how to improve my code base, and you paste all the code in that query? Is it how it works, or is it?
Yeah. So let me go back. So, I'll just recap, Andrew. So, typical indexing is, you basically take each individual file in your folder, you create chunks, right? So that I can basically, for a certain block of code, get embedding, and then this embedding, which basically is like a numeric vector, right, used for indexing, along with file name and start and end, it's kind of stored in an index file. So when you give a query, right, and if it basically says my code or my repo, my project, we generate embedding for the query, right? Vector representation, NLP representation, which is nothing but typically when we speak English or any other language, there are certain words which are more often associated after a particular word. So it's basically representation of that. Now we take that vector, and from the index we identify which one of those chunks are in the nearest neighborhood of what you're asking, right? And basically using those chunks, we create a context. We pass that context to the large language models, right, which might be GPT 3.5, GPT 4, or Claude 2, depending upon whether you're using basic or advanced. And then we basically give a prompt along with that context so that it can answer the query that you're asking. So, when you basically ask on your whole large code base, the whole large code base won't fit into the context window. So whatever fits in, we kind of look at which are the snippets of code which are more likely to answer the question, and we rank it. So based on the context that is available, or like the window size that is available, token limit that is available for the OpenAI or Anthropic queries, we'll take top X, give it as the context, and then ask the question using LLM to generate the answer. So that is how it actually works, if that clarifies your doubt.
Yeah, now it's clear why there is 100 queries limit. Yeah, that's even a lot for such an approach. Probably it's like with GPT model, it's just impossible to do it in different way. Like you have to add this code to every
the context. Yeah, that is the
Oh,
so that is the reason why because when you're asking like ChatGPT, like, you can vary what you're asking, because you're basically just asking question and answers. The moment you basically start asking more things, or copy pasting larger pieces of code, you'll see that, GPT becomes slower and slower. So then you kind of change your model also. That's like, there are different ways to kind of deal with it, but we want to be very straight. This is what we're doing, and this is the cost. And again, as Amar said, right, we just launched it like it will be 1 month, exactly 1 month back, we launched the paid plan, right? August 14th. So we're still taking in feedback, right? Same with like our, AI that understands your code. So today's like the 1 month anniversary of it. We're trying to get the feedback and making it better. Yeah.
I understand you.
Yeah.
All right, that's clear now. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you, Anand.
Thanks. And if you have any feedback, any changes, like Andrew gave a couple, Andrew, you gave a couple, so we'll be basically working on that, putting in our roadmap. So you'll see that happening soon. There'll be some on which what I also need is a group of like beta testers, right? Because what happens is we release a product, and we give it to few guys for beta testing, right? And frankly speaking, not everybody has time from their day job, right? Somebody contributes, somebody does not. But we'd like some critical feedback so that we fix those things before we actually go out and provide it to our users in general. So again, not forcing anyone, but if anybody would like to participate, and doesn't mean that you always have feedback, but if you'd love to participate, let us know, so that anytime we build something, before we even release it, it might be a bit buggy, maybe a bit less performant, but we'll basically give this builds out, so that we get some critical feedback, right? Like, not most of the people, this is great, but what I'm looking for, it doesn't work in this scenario, this fails, like as Andrew mentioned, like dude, it hangs certain amount of time, right? When I do this, can you fix this? But that feedback is good, because once we get it, then we can fix that before we actually go out. So if anybody is interested, please let us know. We trouble Andrew
Sure.
from time to time. Andrew knows that, right? With
Yeah,
the build.
but I think it will be great if you create a Slack channel for I think all the guys here. It's not like 1 million people here that would be interested. Yeah, just add it to the Slack channel.
Yeah,
So like
we'll create one on the community, Bito community, and we'll send it out to everyone who's here. Yep.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. Sounds good. Sophia, over to you.
I have one question about your embeddings and your chunking. So are you chunking based on length, or do you have like specific embedding like cutoff point so that it like knows this is the end of the file, it doesn't keep adding from the next file and stuff like that? Or how do you do that?
Yeah, so typically we don't interchange files, so it's always within a file, right? And we don't chunk based on lines, because like you might overflow the token limits of the embedding API. And if you overflow, the thing is like it won't give an error, it will give you an embedding, but it won't basically, it will disregard any extra data. You don't want that to happen.
Wow.
So we do it based on characters, right? X number of characters. And then if the file ends, we are not going to chunk, the next file's data. It ends out there. So our chunks can be like, anywhere between 1 character to X number of characters,
Cool.
right? And then if you do that way, then you have to do the other thing, which is when you're getting the context, there might be cases wherein, because you're dealing with code, you cannot have like half a portion of code in one chunk and then, half a portion. So if you do that kind of stuff in chunking, when you're actually generating context, you have to make sure that you get the complete line. So if you kind of look at it, we store file and start and end. So when you get the chunks from the index, we figure out if the chunk is incomplete in terms of making sense, then we complete it. So we will add more data than what is coming from index to actually make sense of the data. So there's another logic when we are basically reading from the index. So you have to kind of balance it out. Otherwise, it becomes an issue, right? You'll see, like you have tried it out, right? Like when you basically chunk it, yeah. So yeah. So either you do it when you are chunking it, but that's difficult because that's fixed. So you kind of do it when you're reading from the chunks or index, like, make the context more complete. Right. So that, yeah.
Thank you for the insight.
Yeah.
Hi, Anand and Zara here.
Yeah.
So I have one question that I'm a Java developer, but if I'm writing code in Python, then what happens? I make a lot of mistake. So is there any feature that while writing the code itself, it can show me that you are making these mistakes and correct it out? Something this type of feature is there in GitHub Copilot, if I'm not wrong.
So right now we don't have that functionality. We are working, we are doing something known as code completions, right? Which is still in, I would say, early alpha, but we'll send out a beta version soon to folks here, wherein what happens is when you're typing itself, it will suggest how to complete that particular line. Or if you're giving a comment, if you type a comment, it will generate the code based on the comment that you've typed. So for example, if you say go through the list of files to do XYZ, you type the comment and press enter. It can be multi-line or single line comment. Based on the comment, it will basically generate code, right? But this is like, code suggestion and generation. We are not doing something like, if you've typed some code, like this is when you're coding, right? But if you've typed some code, we automatically, highlight areas which might be wrong based on, like the compile time issues or like other issues that you'll get, and then highlight them and fix it. That is not there as of yet. We'll basically, to be very frank, we'll basically talk about it internally and see where to put it in our product plan, right? So code completions is there, like, what GitHub Copilot and the other guys do. But this part of like, you have written some code, actually, take this file and automatically, at a click of a button, identify things and fix things. We don't have it right now. We'll have to put it in our product plan.
Copilot's actually a really good thing for that, to have that running beside it. So you could have like Bito running with conjunction with, Copilot. But yeah, it would be cool if your software did that too, because then I wouldn't have to pay for Copilot.
Yeah, because today the biggest pain of the developer is the programming language. If this happens, then the programming language barrier ends. Even if a Python developer can code in Java and a Java developer can code in Python, because finally it's just the syntax logic will be same.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we had one guy told, who basically reached out to us. So he codes in Node.js, doesn't code in Python. So he's like, he did the other thing, right? He's like, Bito helps me. I write everything that I need to write in Python in Node.js, and then I ask Bito to convert it. And it runs. And he was like very happy. But I get your point. Like, hey, I'm writing in Python. I'm not a native Python guy or a person. So can this thing, just, even if I write and there are mistakes, just autocorrect the thing so that it becomes easy and I get to know what is autocorrected. Yeah, we'll look into that. It's not impossible. I'll have to basically see where to put it in the product roadmap, but we'll get back to you, Zora, on that.
Yeah.
Good input.
Yeah, actually, my boss, when I told him about your software, he asked if it was a replacement for Copilot, and I was like, no, it's similar, but it's slightly different. Like it's kind of like a different, this is a hammer and this is a screwdriver. It's sort of like that. They're both in the tool set, but they're slightly different. So yeah, they work well together though.
Yeah. So I'll put that in Zora from you. Okay.
This may be out of context of Bito, but any open source project which is in Java, because I don't know Python very well, so where I can contribute because I contribute to open source in generative AI lane.
Okay. Let us get back to you on that.
Okay.
And there are people who are basically creating open source projects in Node.js, Python, because most of these guys, Python is very easy to implement. There are a lot of primitives and stuff, or like a lot of libraries wherein you don't have to do a bunch of things. in Java and other pieces, like, cases, you have to write a bunch of code. That's why, people shy away from, using that for doing this. Like, it's like build on top of whatever is there is easy on the Python side. So I'll share with you a couple of Node.js and Java projects, right, that people are doing, and you can basically contribute. We have like an automation, project that we have opened where we would love people to kind of contribute to see, if you can use Bito CLI or the other things to kind of automate, various tasks. So you can contribute out there also. There is no language barrier out there. So you can use Java, you can use shell script, you can use Python. We don't want to kind of like say there's a Java project or this thing, but whatever you're comfortable with, if you have some idea, just implement it and see if it is useful for people. But I'll share a list with you, Zora, on that.
Thank you.
So Zora mentioned something about the biggest pain point, and for me, it's documentation. No one likes it, and so I mean, I could totally imagine you guys doing like AI generated documentation. You could use like the code functionality and like the code structure as like its context to kind of build, documentation and kind of like follow some kind of
Like for
standard.
Swagger or whatever.
Exactly, kind of like just have that integrated into it. I mean, that would be pretty neat.
Okay. I mean, it's like, we recently, this great feedback because, one, and, I'm basically correlating it with the flow that Andrew talked about, because we had created a very simple script which actually went through a folder and just created, documentation, like markdown documentation for all the files. So then, which is good, which is decent, like, but, then it basically, somebody came up and said, this is great, but, what I need the project documentation, which is like, okay, this is the
Exactly.
project, this is what it does. I don't want like file level documentation. Then you tell me, where does the program start from? Like, what is the entry point? Then what it calls, and then, give me documentation related to it. So yeah, that is, something that we are kind of looking at, but this is great. And like, when you're talking about this documentation, are you kind of looking at like, one is the project based thing, but when you want to create documentation, say for like a particular module, or you want to create it for a concept, or it's like, hey, create a document for, how does this thing work and what it calls, or like just the chain of flow, like, give a natural language query and then create documentation on it.
Yeah, it was actually built upon what Andrew said earlier about a flow and pretty much having the flow and like suggesting flows. If you do keep track of like the documentation of what the new feature you just added is and how it interacts with each other, it would build off of Andrew's idea to basically have it make suggestions like, hey, this is going to add some kind of technical debt here, and you may, do something else that may be better. And
or even
so,
like separation of concerns,
exactly.
if it's like, you're not, you're doing this okay, but you know what, like this block of code and this block of code should actually be in a helper function. I don't know why it's in here, like that kind of thing. So
Okay.
Yeah.
This is good. Like, we like, I'm seeing the same kind of requirement.
the unit test thing is cool though. You have like a unit test thing, and you have it right. I actually showed one of my coworkers at this morning. I was like, want to see something, a quick way to write a test? And he was like, oh wow, that's cool.
Awesome.
But yeah, documentation would be awesome. I hate writing Swagger documentation a lot.
Yeah. This is great feedback.
Yeah, I think I found one more thing for the feedback. Thank you overall that you're quite responsive for the feedback, because like a few months ago, maybe even 3-4 months ago, I asked you that could you guys please add the custom templates, because you have like explained this code to me. For example, I don't really need this thing because I have it in my brain. And I asked you to add the refactor, for example, refactor and improves this code, and you added like custom templates. That's pretty cool, because I mostly use it for the refactoring and unit tests. And so what is my flow with the refactoring? So for example, I select my business logic class. I select all the code, and I go to Bito plugin, press refactor and improve template, and it does the thing for me. And what I do next is actually I press insert changes, inside of Bito. And what I do next, and that I run the diff. I don't know, maybe you have it in VS Code. I've heard something about the Git merge, but I do manually the compare with clipboard, or I just open my Git client UI, and want to see the difference. It would be great because you have the diff tools built in VS Code and JetBrains.
Yeah.
You could probably just run it, and because like maybe at the button near the insert changes or like copy code you have to show the diff, and it would be great for the developers to see the diff just with one click, because I have to do a few more clicks.
Got it. Yeah.
And it's pretty simple. You could ask even some junior devs in your team to do it.
Yeah. So we are working on, or we are like, working on adding like a macro wherein you can basically, when you're creating the custom template, you can say that if there is kind of code generated, enable diff view for the thing that you mentioned. It's not there as of yet, but yeah, that is something that we have clearly heard. A lot of people have opened GitHub issues also for that. Like, can you support it? It's there on our plan. Like rather than saying roadmap, it's on like it's on track to be scheduled in the next sprint. So we'll look at that. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And also one small thing is, when I asked the Bito to refactor the code for me, and the problem is that it does the auto format. It probably runs some auto format stuff or something, and it does not format the code. It removes the spare lines in my code, and me and my team are basically below spare lines because they add some kind of, like in books you have some spare lines between chapters, and inside of the functions sometimes you need to have them to make the code more readable, and it just removes some spare lines, so empty lines between the code lines. And is it the GPT issue, or is it something that Bito does?
So, two things. One is we want to kind of reduce the number of tokens. So we kind of remove some white spaces when we send it over, right?
Okay.
And then the thing is, like the language models will basically sometimes, like, when they are kind of rewriting the code, because you're rewriting the code, it'll remove some white spaces, because white spaces, like, typically, like, it depends, like, different people have different like things, like, I'll leave a line or I'll not leave a line. So these guys, sometimes they'll not basically put some new lines out there. And then we know that, there are some issues with indentation in the output that comes. Right now with VS Code, like, we are basically, as we are doing the code generation piece, like, like code completion, when you're typing a line, complete the code, or when you're, giving a comment, generate the code. We have now figured out a way to actually give the code out there, which is indented. So we are looking at, can we utilize that to actually indent every code that we give? Because when you're inserting, it kind of misses, like, if you're inserting in the middle, we somehow don't realize that, you are at a particular indent level and then put it below it. So now that we know how to do it, we'll be basically, bringing that into normal stuff also. Yeah.
I understand you. Okay, that makes sense. One last small thing is that I've seen, for example, you have some class and you select the first 5 lines of this file or class, and you press Bito, like, for example, performance check, improve readability. It actually pastes the selection of your class, and that's pretty cool. And it was kind of not obvious for me, especially for the junior intern developers in my team. So in different in other similar tools, I've seen that they have it in the contextual menu. So you select the code, right button or mouse button click, and they have it like Bito and list of the templates. You have something similar, right? You have the contextual menu integration.
Yes. Yeah.
I actually did not notice. Oh, that's pretty good actually, because yeah, there was some younger guys was asking me in the team. Cool, that's exactly what we needed. Found it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Awesome. Great. This is great feedback. Thank you, everyone. Like, this has been great. lot of like, I'd say items that we need to fix from the usability perspective, the freezing, the diffuse issue of the content sometimes generated not showing up, freezing on WebStorm. How do I actually go and fix the errors, when you're basically coding? Then, debug and autocorrect from Zora, documentation of the whole project, and then, like, can I have that flow from Andrew? Swagger documentation. So we'll, like, I've just mentioned a few of what I've kind of recorded. We'll send a list of, like, what we got as a feedback if people want to kind of like add more, and probably we'll create a channel for all the folks that are on this call on the Bito community. So if you miss out something, if you remember something later on, you can basically add those to the list, and we'll start working on some of these. And there are a bunch of more, I'd say, indexing improvements coming. So the performance is going to be a bit better, the answers are going to be a bit better. And as I said, we are also like, once we have all of these fixes done, the next thing that is going to be worked on is like the real symbol indexing or symbol search, so that you can have best of both the worlds. That will take some more time to come, and in between we might have a release of like a beta release of code completion, and we'll send out the beta release to all the folks here, so that before it goes out, you can tell us like what works, what doesn't work, what you hate about it, right? Any configuration settings you want. So that's all from my side, but keep the feedback coming. And this is a duplex communication channel, not simplex. So we depend upon you as much as our brains to actually build stuff, and then make sure that this is really usable, right, and helps you guys. So thanks everyone. Thanks for taking time.
Is it possible to get a copy of this recording?
Yes, Sophia will basically share this recording, and probably this will be available, I think, on some publicly available site, or like on Bito itself, Bito AI, for anybody who couldn't join in to view. So we'll have the video link shared with everyone. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I wanted to share it with my boss.
Okay, sure, Andrew. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So I was on your GitHub, and I know this is not public. I'm bored. I just graduated college, and I can't find a damn job. So like, can I contribute some of your stuff? I don't see where to contribute at.
Yeah. Like so basically CLI, like what we want to open source is usage of Bito, right? We're building an automation platform and all those things, so that can be open source. Bito CLI is closed source, and the IDE extension is closed source.
Yeah.
But if you want to contribute, you can contribute on like automation examples, and we can sit down and talk about some projects that we're thinking of bringing out in the open source. But we just lack hands and brains right now.
Well,
So
I have hands and
yeah.
brains.
So I'll take you. Like you're like keep make me busy. I'm like, you don't know what I have in my mind. So I'll take your offer on that. What I'll do, Andrew, is send your like GitHub handle, or what you have. I will include you in some of the projects directly, right? And we can discuss, and you can start contributing. This is great. Thanks, for jumping in and helping out. So, and if you want, if you have some idea and you want to create a project, as a part of Bito, just let us know. We'll, we are open to that completely.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Can I message through the contact, or is there a specific way to get in contact with you guys?
Just me. Right now, me, just send an email. I will include you in.
Could
At
you
least,
post an
I'm the
email,
admin
or?
right now. The DevOps guys haven't basically dealt with me yet. They will at some point in time, like, but till then I can add you in. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your email? Is it listed somewhere?
Just mail me on anand.das. I'll just basically put it out here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I want to get busy. I'm doing a contract right now for a chatbot, but it's going really easy. It's really, really simple how it's implemented right now. So it handles their Q&A on their website already fine. So I want to do something new. I want something else. This is fun.
Yeah. I got Andrew's also, which is great. Thanks, Andrew. Awesome.
Okay, so we're done.
Yep.
Okay. Well, have a
Thank
great
you.
day, guys. Again, congratulations on the software. It's amazing. I'm very, very impressed. So, and I'm really excited to see what you do next with it. So, all right.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.